It's just
Oh,
muted, so
oh, okay.
yeah, so
That
I'm
that's
just muting it from right there.
perfect. Okay, you use that mic.
We will give this to
Whoever is
the host. Yeah.
who's
Check. Oh, it is delayed. Yeah. Check. 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 So in about 6 seconds, you should hear it.
Thank you, Pat. Okay, I hope you're here. Thanks, Pat and David. So, well, I just faked this title because I just asked AI, say, hey, I want to get something exciting. So that's what I got. True, I'm too lazy. So, thank you. So let's get started with something personal. Well, this is a photo frame, whatever, in my kitchen. So most of them are occupied by my daughter. In about 2 hours, she will officially become 3, which is a terrible thing. But this is one of the places in our house that we really, really appreciate. And we put a lot of attention into it. You see, I made those photos all the way from she was very, very young and when she grown up a little bit. And then we stopped making that because that's very annoying. But you can see, photography was such amazing human inventions that allowing us to keep the most precious moment in our life, to capture those moments, and allowing us to revisit across space and time. It's fantastic, right? So as much as we really appreciate this, and she hasn't turned 3 yet, so I have one question for everyone, is about photography. That is, when does it happen? Anybody? Volunteer? So wrong answers only. Early 18th century? Close? Anybody? Close to that. Yeah, that's closer. Great. So the very first modern photography was roughly early 18th century. Well, actually, that's the 19th century. Sorry, I was wrong. You're too far. Sorry, I was confused about the numbers. Yeah, so that was not long ago. Say if you count out roughly 200 years ago, right? And this is that photo had been taken at the time. So they capture a landscape, not landscape, so it's kind of a city scene. No idea, it's hard to tell what it is, right? But that was the very first one. So the reason why we start with photography is that photography was such a good medium, great medium to capture our memory, our experience, our feeling, and it's static. And with the advance of technology nowadays, it's become so convenient taking photos. Now you don't need to carry a 50-pound camera and lenses, go to places, you can just carry your phone. It was so convenient that everybody really appreciate, and photography become part of our reality, right? But what about the other part of the reality, right? So it's so convenient, even in our research, it was so easy to just take photos of people. Now we say, okay, let's use those photos as stimuli and study all sorts of cognitive capacities, and then we claim some theories out of it. But the fundamental question I always ask is, we live in a lively world. Everything is dynamic, everything is changing, everything is moving. And to be honest, while we're recognizing the invention of photography was just for merely 200 years, how long does it take for human beings to evolve? Billion years or million years, I have no idea, but definitely longer than 200 years. That's how our cognitive system, how our brain is shaped. It's not shaped by the experience of those static, emotionally evoking static input, visual input. It's our experience in our everyday life, outside, especially before we become more civilized in the wild, so many things are moving. And that's those moving natures that shapes our cognitive capacity. However, that's the gap here. For over 100 years, our research about visual perception, cognition, more specifically face processing, that is more relevant to this talk today, is established on top of using static pictures. And the question is, to what extent our understanding about our vision perception, development, cognition really counts for our capacity that we are born with, the capacity that we evolve with. So faces is one of the predominant stimuli that we ever grown up with, right? It's so hard not to see people around us. Whenever we see people, they'll respond to your looking. They'll respond to your tender face a little bit, you know? And thanks to all the muscles and bones that exist in our face, then we can make so many different kinds of facial movement, delivering very rich linguistic, communicational, even affective information easily. And those dynamic properties that carries those rich social and cognitive communicative information, how much our brain can deal with that. And that's basically the question I've been asked. And that's how I started my research roughly 15 years ago. So, but before I introduced my research, focused on face perception or processing in general, so I want to first introduce a very highly robust, well-established phenomenon or perceptual effect that we often use as a hallmark of our perceptual capacity. And that relates to face processing. But you will see it right away, even though you're not in this field. Look at this face. Who's this? Anybody? Wrong answer only? Oh my God, you're crazy. But that wasn't easy. But this is what makes things easier, right? But you got the right answer, but I was asking for wrong answer. So why? Why, when you put the two halves of the faces combined together, it makes it very difficult to tell what's going on there. But when you slightly misalign them, you start to say, oh, wait, this is so clear. It's two different celebrities. I have no problem to recognize them. It's just because we experience theory-wise, it's a huge theory. It's because we tend to process facial information in a holistic manner that it's irresistible to integrate all the information and help us to make a decision. So that makes the decision to say, well, this is George Clooney is very, very hard because there's a Christian Bale as interfering, automatically mess up with your brain. So, and this is a composite face effect, has been found in late I think it's 1897. So I could not see the number. So that was the time I was 2, roughly the same age as my daughter. And so experimentally, how to verify this effect is usually ask participants to say, okay, so now the task is very simple. Can you compare the top half of the faces? Ignore the bottom half, and they say, okay, is the same person or not, right? Instead of naming the person, we just say, it's the same person. Oftentimes, you observe, when the two face halves align, the participant normally found very difficult to recognize, as compared to when you just, move them apart. And so the differences between the two, the gray, so the green and the blue bar, this basically represent what we learned about face processing over the last 25 years. It's holistic processing. It's so robust, you can never fail this task. Again, this is the theory based on using static pictures. But we ask about, what if the face start to move? Does this theory hold when it start to move? So, yeah, this is a video I filmed probably 12 years ago. I hope he's still this young. So what I did is very subtle. I'm not going to do dramatic facial movement, I'm not asking you to do crazy about how to, gouge your eyes or these kind of things. No, just drawing, even without reviewing your teeth. There's a very subtle things. Of course, it's silent. There's no linguistic. There's no emotional information. There's not much information. So what we do is we ask a very similar question. Participant adults this time, don't worry, there is a baby down the row. And adults will basically watch first a moving face or static face. And then later on, they will test with those we call composite face. And the task was that, okay, so you saw the face before, and then you saw the face, so another face. Can you compare the top part of the two faces you just see, and then tell me, is the same person or different person, right? Very easy. So, and this is what we found. So we, for sure, replicate the composite effect as you see the color, the bars, but with static phase for sure, but no longer with moving phase. Even though the moving phase is so subtle, it's just chewing their lips a little bit. And so as much as we want to believe holistic processing is such a signature, defines phase processing, defines our expertise level of phase processing more specifically, the same participant show a significantly less and isn't kind of and just less a composite effect when they're just looking at the phase move of their mouse a little bit. And they can do this with 600 milliseconds just watching of the move. So, and then we also do some analysis of say so the reduction of the holistic processing really associated and boost the overall performance, recognition performance, and we found a very beautiful positive correlation between the two. And if you're a serious scientist, you'll probably say, well, you're probably just lucky or unlucky for one time, right? So, graduate students, you make all the mistakes and you found some fake effect and you believe that. So I had exactly the same doubt. So we tried to replicate this. And this time, we tried to replicate it by asking participants to recognize the lower part of face. That's even harder because, just match the mouse and this kind of thing. But regardless, we replicate the effect. 2 years later, when I started learning how to use eye tracker, I did the study again, but this time I was no longer the experimenter. Somebody else, I barely recognize his name. Yeah. And we replicated the result again. You can see on the left side. But what's interesting about eye tracking data is, we can know how adults is looking at the faces while they make the judgment or whatever. And what we found is on the left corner, so the left panel of the correlational result. And we found out is like how much they actually allocate their attention to the top part of the face, which is relevant part of the face, the facial part that is relevant to the task, positively associated with how much they can utilize the facial movement to facilitate their recognition style. And so it seems like looking at the moving face kind of free our attention across the face and allowing us to process information more freely without the restriction of the holistic framework. Again, 2 years later, I started to learn how to use neuroimaging. Not a very good one, but we found all the association. We found the correlates between the brain activity and the improved holistic or decreased holistic processing was associated roughly around the right hemisphere superior temporal gyrus, which has been believed is related to a lot of social and the dynamic aspect of facial processing. I was very, very exciting for this result, even though I couldn't publish this. Well, you probably say, wow, that's cool, but all you did was just using the Turing face, silent Turing face, but that doesn't capture our experience about people, about faces, about all the natural dynamics that we ever experience. So I actually did another line of research. I say, focus on the rigid facial movement. What does this mean, rigid? So that means, your muscle and bone doesn't really change. All the things that change is continuous viewpoint change, like this. Pretty boring. But it took me, I remember, almost 6 months already when I was undergrad student. Again, by the way, you see the results replicated. And so we have replicated actually for more than 13 times. You see how boring I am. But across undergrad students, various places across the world. And then we start to ask a question. And at that time, usually, it's my second year, third year of my graduate program, actually the first year graduate program at U of T. And my advisor asked me, say, hey, just to let you know, we are a developmental department. If you want to get a degree, you probably want to do some developmental work, to establish yourself. So that's a very gentle touch, push. So I would say, okay, since this is highly robust found in adults, what about the developmental trajectory? So I went to school, actually several schools, because it's really hard to find so many participants across wide age range. So we did 8-year-old, 12-year-old, and adults once again. As you can see, for sure, the younger the kids goes, the worse they can, perform the task. But the general pattern remained, right? You can see just eyeballing. I don't need to tell you that there's a significant interaction. That was the elastic movement. We use a Turing face, and we have another bunch of participant kids, different school, different city. I travel a lot at the time, just make sure we can convince them to participate. Again, we replicate by using the rotating head. Well, overall, we showed very highly robust effect indicating how when you introduce a little bit dynamic elements into the faces, and the way they perceive face, the way they process facial information is deviate from what we learned from the past 30 years or somehow. I have a huge difficulty to publish the first paper. The editors ask us to review 3 or 4 times. Sometimes you say, can you change the word from facilitate to influence, more neutral? Anyway, so that was a hard time at the beginning, but things get much easier later on. When things get easier, it gets boring. And I hate doing boring things. And the questions start to continue. Since we established this unique, distinctive face processing strategy within moving faces, and as young as 8 years of age, does that also speak to a much earlier emergence of this speciality? On the other hand, thinking about how babies are grown up in our everyday normal life experience is, I have to say, they probably don't have much experience about static faces. Most of the babies I know, they have their very first static face experience was when they're coming to our lab doing a static face study, right? So infants are grown up in a very social, interactive environment while people provide rich facial information presented in a dynamic format. How does that would change the way we understand the early development of face processing? So I start to get my hands on babies using a much simpler way to test their capacity. So this study is about their recognition performance, whether infants, after they learn a face, can tell the face from a different face, right? It's a very simple format. And so usually we do is, we put the same face over and over and over. Well, if it's a static picture, for sure. Over and over and over for this time, 30 seconds. It's not that long, but pretty boring. But then after that, we believe, they should probably have some impression of this face, and then should be able to demonstrate some discrimination abilities if they can really learn this face. So usually we put the 2 faces side by side this time, and now one of the faces is the face they saw, and the other face is a new one. So we call it novel face. And usually to tell whether infants who can recognize the faces is by looking at how much time they look at the faces, right? So normally we're looking into something called novelty preference. We're going to revisit this idea later on. And novelty preference indicating basically is they put a much longer time look at the faces they haven't seen before, right? So novelty preference. And this is what we did. It's very simple. The major contrast is during the learning of the face, they're going to learn the face as a picture, or they'll learn the face in a video. Doing Turing, again, Turing video. So, and at that time, I already, learned a lot of things about using eye tracking. So why not just using that instead of, hand code that they were looking at. So eye tracking, eye movement patterns. So this is something I'm showing you. Is we have 3 age groups across almost more than 100 babies. And so basically, what you're looking at is where they're looking at on the face, right? So the green part is kind of a baseline, and the warm color indicate where they look at on average, right? The warmer the color, that means the longer time they spend on, And the spatial distribution of this warm colors would tell you how spread out that they'll put their attention to. And because this study was done in China, they show very East Asian face-looking style by looking at the center of the face instead of focusing on the eyes or salient features such as mouth, right? And very interesting, it's very consistent across age. Sometimes I feel very assuring. I'm about to show you what about when the same amount of babies, when we show them a face that just doing the very minimal chewing movement. This is how they look, right? So at 3 months of age, they roughly show this roughly the same, regardless of moving or static. They look at same locations, eyeballing. I'll show you some results later on. But starting 6 months of age, you can see their attention on facial information is spread out, gradually spreading out. And by 9 months of age, it's very salient already. The look at the mouth is chewing, it's moving. It might be something happening. Also have some time, put some time around the eyes region. So that's very interesting. It seems like just by looking at where they look, just by examining where infants look when you present the picture versus video, it can already tell something about the development. And so we average and summarize the data based on the specific region we define as the eyes, nose, and the mouth. And the most salient contrast you can observe between static and dynamic, which is light and dark blue bar, is around 9 months of age, how much time they spend looking at the eyes region and how much time they look at around the mouth region, right? And if you're smart enough, you'll say, well, okay, that's not what. It just, there's something move. Of course, it'll attract a lot of attention, right? It's not anything cognitive related. It cannot be contributing to anything. Exactly. That's exactly how I doubt myself, just like most of you would doubt yourself in the middle of the research. It's what does this really tell us about the nature of their observation of faces that moves in the naturalistic way. So how to address this is we're just trying to decompose how they look. So basically the result you're looking at is average result across a time course of 30 seconds, the familiarization, right? So 30 seconds might be nothing for baby or for infant research, but 30 seconds is huge in terms of our everyday interactions when we look at people. If you try to stare at somebody for 30 seconds, either of you have the problem, right? So, but within these 30 seconds, that allow infants to do all kinds of things, whether they will do more active scanning or whether their attention just zoom to the region that they just gave some visual saliency, right? To address this question, it's actually quite straightforward. And we're actually one of the first to propose this strategy to analyze the frequency, how infants will move their gaze across the face space. And so basically we define the bidirectional, we call it fixation shift. It basically is, so okay, since now you're looking at the eyes, for example, now you look at the left eye, and if you look at the nose for the next fixation, it will count, they will count into a fixation shift, right? And the larger the number of fixation shift, that means that the more active to scan the face and maybe sample facial information more actively, right? So that's a valid, I'm not sure about that. That's one of the measures to tell us the temporal dynamics of how infants really learn this face by calculating the fixation shift. And now you see, again, same infants, they look at the face, move a little bit. So if we thought they're simply just driven by a moving part, then we shouldn't expect their attention will go away very quickly or very frequently because that's how their attention. But what we found here is as increase of age, infants will more actively scan the face when the face are doing some chewing facial movement. But the same infants, they will do significantly less fixation scanning about to sample facial information when we just gave them a static picture. And we have checked that, the total time to actually learn the two phases, learn static phase and dynamic is roughly comparable. So it's really the way how they really sample the information and process phases. Okay, but now we haven't got to the most important question is how that really benefit infants, in terms of the task we ask them to, in terms of recognizing the face. Okay, here it is. So instead of looking at overall recognition performance, we're looking into the relation between how much infants look at the face by analyzing the proportion of us, doing the fixation shifting, and their performance indicted by indexed by the novelty preference. And so I'll walk you through. There are a lot of numbers on the slide. Doesn't really matter. So on the x-axis, basically telling you how active infants were you scanning facial information. 0 means stay in one location, never move out of the region. It's just like that. Very lazy looking. But on the other hand, 100% means they're always moving. They're nonstop. Every fixation will be landed in a different region relative to the face feature that we define, eyes, nose, and mouth, right? It's very active. So what we found here is, those so-called fixation or face scanning patterns, doesn't matter too much about their performance when they're learning a picture, It doesn't matter how you learn this picture. Yeah, it is what it is. There's nothing to help you. Again, the same infants, when they're looking or learn face in motion, 3 months of age, hopeless. But it's great, give us a baseline to compare with. But starting from 6 and 9 months of age, we see their efforts pays back. The more active scanner, the more active face, scanner, let's just say scanner, the more successful they are to recognize this face. And so what this really tells us is, our interpretation is that when infants' perceptual system encounter the faces they normally see in their environment, which showing naturalistic facial movements, and the way they see it will highly correlate with their outcome, cognitive perceptual outcome. And so that means the perceptual system within the first year of life is already tuned to the feature of faces that can move naturally. And this is just one of the first studies we did with babies. And this study only examined, at something perceptual level. But as I mentioned earlier, faces move in various ways. They're not just chewing. Actually, we barely perform any chewing movement to anybody, including babies. I never did this to my baby. But most importantly, when faces move, they're showing emotion. They're communicating with others. And that's the high-level cognitive properties is also included and conveyed by our various facial movement. And the question coming after is how well prepared infant will be to extract those high-level properties out of the motion, of the moving of the faces, right? So we look into facial expression, right? Doing a lot of facial expressions. And this is a collaboration with my dear friend, Valentina, as on the left. She has very vivid facial expression all the time, simply because she's Italian. Italian is great because that gives you a very salient, distinctive facial movement to express, to indicate different emotions, right? And that was actually how we did initially, is to capture facial movement. It's similar to mocap systems in Live Lab, and a lot of places you put the reflection dots on the face. It doesn't matter where you put, so we're not that serious. But then we asked them to perform various facial movement to show happy, to show fear, which are the two candidates we use for this study. And unfortunately, we lost the video. We only have a snapshot of the video. I really hope we have video to show how it goes, but at least we have the result stimuli. We extract the motion signal. So this technique called point light display has been invented since 1979. Has been highly valid approach to understand the motion, independent of all the static of visual property or visual features. This is how we do with a fearful facial expression. Wasn't that clear, right? And this is about happy. Ha ha ha, right? Pretty silly. Okay, but half of you don't believe me. You're not convinced. What's this? It's just moving dots, right? How could you say this is emotion? This is far away from the emotion we experience everyday life, right? How could you say that? Yes, you're absolutely right. Because just by looking at those moving dots, there are so many different ways you can perceive that. And even though we really prefer them to see the emotion out of those motion patterns, the reality is sometimes you probably just see those moving dots all the way, right? It's pretty. It doesn't matter. But I want to ask you, anybody see anything out of those moving dots? There's a square, there's a triangle, right? So what does this mean? Our perceptual can stay at multiple levels. You can stay at the low level, just perceive the individual isolated moving dots, or maybe it can be elevated to a level that you can perceive something constructed by those motion based on the commonality, based on the regularity, right? And this is something we ask in this study is, what's the developmental trajectory for infants to perceive those motion signals? And we assume extracted from the Italian actors that perform happy and fearful expressions. It can be that infants were like, nah, I only see dots. I don't know, nothing. No face, no facial expression, no emotion, not at all, nothing. So that we call, probably they'll undergo a progressive development, start from low level to high level. And another regressive process might also happen is, what gives you the ability to perceive emotion out of this abstract moving dots, highly likely is coming from your daily experience. And if infants are grown up in a normal caregiving environment, most of the emotional experience they have is positive, happy, right? So we're expecting there's something will happen about those happy stimuli as opposed to the moving dots that depict fearful, which is very rarely perceived. Actually, we surveyed all the participants. Only one of them probably see fearful once. So how can we tell? Again, same procedural, habituation, showing the same video over and over. And then during the task, we always show two contrasting emotions, but extracted from the same actress or actors. We have a lot of stimuli, but they're all Italian, great. So this is the way, right? So if they can really tell the differences, yeah, you probably can see, well, okay, they show a novelty preference in this case. So put a longer looking time to the fearful condition as compared to the happy one. And similarly, within subject, within participant, we did another fearful condition. That is, they're habituated with fearful, but the test phase is roughly the same. One fearful, one happy, and then we count the balance afterward, right? So it's very simple. But the key here is that if infants can do very well, just by looking at the motion dots, irrelevant of emotion content, they should show comparable performance, right? Why not? The same day, within the same 20 minutes, they did the two tasks, and they should perform equally well. But if they could extract those high-level emotional signals out of those moving dots, we're expecting something distinctive between the two emotion conditions, right? Because they have more experience with happy, but way less experience with fearful expression. And this is what we found. At 3 months of age, perfect baby. I couldn't believe they can do this. All about chance, meaning they could recognize but we don't see any difference between the two emotions. But it's also clear in front of you that as infants grow up with older infants, 6 months and 9 months of age, and we start to see a divert between the two emotions. Even though the task for the two conditions are roughly identical, but they perform very differently. Why was that? That is very difficult to address, especially convince our reviewers, but we finally convinced them. It took us several years. But the idea is that our perception will stay at a certain level. When our perception, this is the idea we call entry-level hypothesis. That is, when we engage a lot of visual input or any perceptual sensory input, our perceptual processing might stay at a certain level. For example, with the moving dot, you can stay at a low level just to pay attention to this moving dot individually, very, very crazy, happy. Or you can develop the tendency to extract some high-level information. Even though we do not know, we don't have the confidence to say what is those high-level info. And that was because when they're at this age, the tendency to perceive emotion information already elevated to the level is allowing them to extract high-level properties. They will ignore those low-level noise. So infants will no longer respond to the contrast between just how those dots move differently. And so that's the reason why, with the fearful conditions, we found a perfect chance level performance. Is that even though the moving pattern, velocity, speed are different, that doesn't matter anymore. Their perceptual already go up to high level and it would never return. So I was very satisfied. So that defines one of my career point about my theoretical thinking about perceptual development. Okay, the very last thing. I know you're waiting, right? So they should be talking, just like what I'm doing now. And you're going to ask questions, hopefully, and you will do the same. Face talks, right? Whenever you see faces, they talk. And how that actually create a very unique scenarios that how facial and the language or speech information should intertwine and develop some high-level mental representations, right? Yeah, so I'm going to show you several videos before we go to the study.
Today is essentially a grand storytelling competition. We're all striving to present our own national, cultural, and personal stories in the most persuasive manner. I remember reading somewhere that in the olden times we said, if you want to poison a people, you must poison their wells. But in this day and age, as novelist Ben Okri said, if you want to poison a people, poison their stories. Because stories sway people. They change the course of policies, politics, and indeed the world. I'll give you an example. During the
Round answer only. Who? Well, you're a spoiler, so anyway. So this is what we have been doing for the last 2 years. And we're able to, not only this time, for the very first time since 15 years ago, one of the things I really want to do is not only we can using cameras to capture a facial movement. I've done this a lot since 2007. But how can we copy one's facial movement to another person? That was something in my mind for 15 years already. Actually, no, 12 years, before we found a solution. And with that, well, of course, that's a technical gimmick, for sure, yeah, with a lot of taxpayers' money. But then we can ask a very interesting question. And as an example, I'm going to show you here today is how infants will start to associate language with face of different races. It sounds sensitive, but that's fine. We're doing science.
Indeed, as I learned, there were on a planet where the little prince lived, as on all planets, good plants and bad plants. In consequence, there were good seeds from good plants.
So we have one white face, one Asian, speaking synchronously, perfectly synced, identical facial movement. They'll tell a story, Little Prince. And you just heard the English version.
原来，在小王子的星球上，就像其他所有星球上一样，有好草和坏草，因此也就有益草的草籽和毒草的草籽。
Anyway, this is not the time you learn Mandarin, so let's move on. So how can we do this? This was exactly the stimuli we present to our babies, and while their parents are really shocked about what they're looking at, what they're hearing, the babies start to looking at one face over the other face. And that's exactly what they're looking at, is which face they're looking at will tell us how the brain is integrating the visual and speech information, right? So we use a very classical called looking while listening paradigm or cross-model matching paradigm with infants across 4 to 8 months of age. Oh, actually, we have a 2 age group, by the way. So pretty wide range across infancy. They're all white, fortunately. Unfortunately or fortunately, we did this in Canada. Only white families really want to participate. And we make sure they only learn English, doesn't come in from any bilingual families. Actually, bilingual family is not interested in participating in our study as well. So we have a wide range, I say wide, only 5 of language we actually played. We have English, you heard, Mandarin, you also heard, even though you could not tell. And we also have Korean, South part. So we also have European language that infants have non-experience with. Like we have, oh wait, I didn't say this. We have Spanish, we have Russian, and some of them are contributed from an audience. So thank you. I hope I paid you, but anyway. And the race category is Asian and white, and the more detail, I think you don't need to know, but we put a lot of examples. It costs a lot of money, hours. Every face video we create, it costs 3 days. Okay. Before I show you the data, let's just say how to read the data. So basically, we'll plot where they're looking at across the trial, of course, average across many trials. So every trial was 15 seconds. We randomly chop a 15-second clip from a 1-minute story narratives. So it's kind of random. So the time point doesn't really mean any specific content related to the stimuli we presented. It's more about capturing the temporal dynamics of how infants will engage in the stimuli when they're speaking different language, right? So it's language related, but not specific to the content. So this is one thing to learn. And now you see there's dashed line, which is half-half. That means, okay, that spend the equal amount of time looking at the left and the right. Good. So they're fair. But if it go above 50, go above the dashed line, that means they look longer to the white face. If they go below, that means they look longer to the Asian faces, right? Clear? Right. Okay, so here's what we found. So the red indicating was speaking English, and the yellow was indicating it was speaking Asian language, which is not familiar with to babies. And you can see at the beginning of the trial, their looking patterns overlap perfectly, right? Maybe the first 2 seconds, 2 to 3 seconds, their looking dynamics align perfectly well. But then afterward, their looking diverge. Started indicating associated specific language with faces, right? And you see the horizontal solid line at the top. Those lines indicate is permutational, cluster permutation analysis. It'll cost another 30 minutes to calculate. So that tells you the significance of sections throughout this 15-second period. So you can see it's very interesting looking dynamics, and the same infants look at the same stimuli, visual stimuli, in a distinctive way, just because they're speaking different language, right? Okay, so I have to point your attention to how old those babies are. These are actually quite young, right? So it's from 4 months to 8 months of age. You might want to ask, what about development? We have another older group, right? What are you expect to see for that one? Again, let me show you the younger one as a contrast. But this is the older one. They don't care. Like me, I don't care a lot of things. I don't care. At least I would say, have to be very, very accurate, say, their looking patterns was no longer driven by the language they heard. It does not necessarily mean they don't have the idea who is supposed to speak any language. It's just that their mental representation of the association between language and face race no longer would drive their visual attention. And that there's some other studies shown they drive a much higher level of cognitive processing, such as word learning. But again, you probably want to think about this is, what does this mean, right? It looks cool, it sounds great, but then how much that advances our understanding, right? Is it really just a technical gimmick that, make me happy? Or they actually contribute to a new knowledge? That's the interesting part. And to do that, we contrasting a study published several years ago from Janet Worker's lab, UBC, professor, super nice, but it's an icon in the field about language, speech and language development. They did roughly the same study. They played a speech, continuous speech sound, and then show two faces. One is Asian, one is what? White, right? The only difference is that from their study, in their study from our study, is that there are pictures. Static, boring pictures on the screen. I want to point you to what they found. They also have a younger group and older group. They didn't find any association with younger group. And it was only up to 11 months of age on average they found the association, but only when the Cantonese was spoken. Cantonese audio was played, not spoken, because there's two pictures. How can you say they were speaking, right? So contrast to what we found is the opposite. It's a drastically different patterns we found. And what we argue is, with naturalistic stimuli that we're able to achieve now with nowadays technology, we can uncover a lot of very different developmental patterns that we know before. So at least this gimmicks pays out, and they really tell us something different, and we do not know if we stay with static pictures. Okay, so from adults to children to babies, a lot of babies, and we found consistently the story is that there's a very distinctive, special visual or face processing capacities will reveal if you use more naturalistic stimuli. And this is how we brain, well, one of the way you can explain this is how the brain is supposed to be built for. It's not to process our pictures, even though we really appreciate them. And with moving those technologies, and we could understand not only their low-level perceptual level processing, but as well as high-level communicative and emotional, affective, even linguistic capacities by utilizing naturalistic moving faces. Last but not least, I know we really put a lot of emphasis on theory-driven research, but to be honest, historically, methodology advancement make a much contribution to the advance of the science. So when we have new tool, new technology, which I show you a little bit today, will open up tons of questions that we are not able to address before. I have the same question in 2010. I could not address the question until today. So I do not know what's going to happen in the next 15 years. All right, so thank everyone. And my lab members, my collaborators, and my advisors throughout the years. Yeah, it's a lot of efforts, and families across the world, and also paid a lot of contributions. So I really appreciate it. So thank you so much, and I guess I can take some questions. Oh, yeah. You wait. Lady first.
Thank you for a great talk, very interesting. About your last study, do you expect the same kind of result for babies from a country that's a little bit less diverse, for example, China, where they only usually see Chinese people only speaking Chinese, because in Canada, I think babies around the time they're 1, especially if they start childcare early, if their parents are social, they see a lot of people in different races that speak different languages.
Yeah, right. So that's a great question. It's about how specific it is related to their infant's experience. And we did the study in Canada. And I think part of our data, especially the older groups, really contribute to this question. That is, we're expecting they have much more diverse experience, even though it's just rolling on the street, right? And so they start to see different people of different races, and they start to see people speaking different languages. So the association between type of faces and the type of language is no longer that strong, will be weakened by the influence of their experience. And so another part of the question is, what if, what's the predictions for infants who are growing up in a monolingual or monoracial, much homogeneous environments such as China, mainland China. So we're actually collecting the data in China right now. So spoiler alert. But there's no, we don't have a result yet, so it will take a while to get the data. So one of the predictions that we have is, we probably will expect the older groups will behave similarly or even strongly to show the disassociation depending on the language, like similar to the younger group. Yeah. Pat?
A question about the middle study, the one on motion, dot motion.
Yep.
And just can you remind me, what was your explanation for why you get the divergence
This one?
at 9 months? Like, why do they drop to 50% when they're habituated to fear?
Yeah, so our interpretation is by this time of age, they can see the high-level properties conveyed or depicted by those moving dots. They don't think about this is they start to adopt a more holistic approach to process what they see instead of looking at individual dot movement, right? And so, this we assume comes from their experience, daily experience with people, like moving their face in their time, and most of their interactions is related to happy, smiling. And so that's our prediction. If they are able to extract those high-level visual properties from those moving dots, it's most likely they are able to extract with the facial expressions that is representative in their environment, which is happy. But because they don't have experience knowing how those fear are really shown on faces, and at this time they have no idea what they're looking at. So by the time they no longer can tell the difference.
So I have, I guess, 2 questions, a bit more, maybe 3. So it's still unclear to me, based on that, why you would see no preference when they're habituated to fear, and then they're shown fear and happy on the test.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they're habituated to fear, and then you show them 2 things, one of them should be that face. Oh, I know what that is, happy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
So the idea.
that's one, but the other question is, are you saying that adults, they experience fear a lot, so they can do that? Because we would not show this asymmetry.
Yeah.
We perceive things at a high level.
Yep.
So we would easily just...
To show similar discriminations.
What happens if you rotate the face?
Good question. We actually have the data. There's no differences at the barely chance level. For all 3. Yeah, for all 3 groups and 2 conditions.
But
yeah.
Okay, so, but when you rotate the faces, it's not like face-like anymore.
Yeah, it's just moving patterns,
And
right?
they can't do it.
Yeah, they can't do it. They can't extract anything. So
What's going on with the 3 and 6-month-olds? Because they're not at chance.
they're not at chance. Great. So we're saying is, 3 months old is a lot of experience, and the emotion is one of the fundamental capacities to grown up with. Daphne shown a few weeks ago, regardless of deprivation, emotion is intact. Emotion perception is intact. So they were able to just based on the motion patterns, such as speed, the velocity of these dots are different to make the judgment. But this is a low-level based kind of perceptual decision will no longer be available when they were able to engage high-level processing to extract high-level properties. So they will no longer respond to those motion contrasts.
You're saying 9 months.
9 months ago, yes.
Yeah, well, I'm saying like at 3 months.
Yeah.
Above chance.
They're above chance, yes, reliably.
They're just doing the low-level stuff.
That's our explanation.
Why wouldn't they do it when they're rotating?
They're still above chance, but not significantly above chance. But if you compare inverted and upright, they're at the same level. So we need a larger sample size to really tell the differences. Yep. Bubbling? Yeah. Interesting. Well, this is not oh, you mean the other study, right? You mean this one? Sorry, it's a lot of slides. You mean this one, right? That's a great question. It's about their own motion, how their own motion really contribute to their sensitivity to those, other people's mouse movement. It's very likely. But within this study, and we didn't have any data to speak to how much, individually, the level of their language capacity or their babbling capacity. And this is something we're doing now, actually, to see how infants, again, baby, and how their self-generated motion signals, such as their own babbling, and will be integrated in their way in terms of visual scanning of the scene. And the spoiler alert again, and yes, we found that. So that might partially can speak to that. So we found is infants are very, very sensitive to if their own self-motion signal is project in the visual environment. It's very salient to them. And so that might contribute to how much they were sensitive to other people's movement.
Because I read a paper about that. Regardless of their language environment, bilingual, monolingual,
Yeah. Yeah, right. So it's quite universal. But still, there might be a multiple cognitive processing might be comes together, contribute to their attentional patterns. Yes, Ben?
If we go back to Pat's question,
Mm-hmm.
like it sounded like you were saying that at 9 months of age, or sorry, before 9 months of age, no, at 9 months of age, babies don't have,
Oh wait, not this one. Sorry.
they don't have as much experience with fearful faces, so they don't habituate to them as well. Is that what you're saying? And I was wondering if it's maybe at 9 months.
No, they habituate, but they don't know what habituation.
I'm wondering if at 9 months babies just start to understand the fearful expression, and they're more likely to look back at the fearful face that they habituated to. So like, oh, that poor guy.
Yeah, you're right. So yes, we actually have control. That's a great question. Sorry for interrupting. Yeah, so yes, that's very likely. It's like there are two forces kind of cancel out each other, right? So one force is I can recognize, I show novelty preference. On the other hand is, fearful is something, this is very salient signals, I'll keep looking back. And the two different directions will cancel each other and leading to a perfect 50-50. So we actually did the control experiment just by showing, without any habituation, just showing fearful and happy side-by-side moving, just like the test phase. And we want to, if that's the case, we should show we call spontaneous preference for the fearful. We didn't find 50-50 again. So, yeah, but that's a great question. Thank you. Yeah, Rob. Yeah, you
yeah, for your English, it seems the pattern is the same. Like, it seems that they are just having like a clear preference to look at the white faces when they're speaking Mandarin.
Yeah, it's true. Right. So they actually look more to the white faces.
Yeah, so I was thinking like maybe it's because they are so biased to look at their own face that they are that effect is masking and it's just
Right.
your earlier effect.
Yeah. So I think if I understand you correctly, you were saying, oh, their visual preference driven by the visual elements such as face raise is too strong at this age that overrides anything can be possibly driven by the language, right? That's a great comments. So what do we learn actually about infants' visual sensitivity regarding preference regarding face race is they will actually, well, this is a published paper in 2015, and it's actually they look longer to Asian faces. I mean, other race faces. So if the result at the older group can really expand just by visual elements such as face race, we should see a stronger preference going to the Asian instead of white face. So language definitely plays a role, language definitely plays a role here to kind of modulating how the visual patterns here, but cannot be solely explained by just the visual elements.
Yeah, like here what I was thinking is like maybe they are like biased for their own race.
Yeah, but no.
Seeing a dynamics so very entertaining way, so they want to explore that richness of movement.
That's a good idea.
Auditory, visual, but then when they have this static, so
They go to the novel. Yeah, maybe we should have a condition with silent, without playing any language, just silent, and see what we found, right? Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you. And
well, actually, on top of the language aspect, but I always got, I mean, I think we discussed this before, but in terms of accent, right? So, for example, if you're studying English and then, okay, you use mostly with the white face, provided like Cantonese to Asian faces, provided you hear Cantonese, then English with someone, like a Cantonese speaker speaking English, like tonality differences.
yeah, we call Qing English.
Wouldn't you expect them to look more the white face because the English or the Asian face?
Yeah.
Versus like English accent to Cantonese. Like you can obviously hear the tonalities from someone who speaks English, so would you expect them to look towards the white or because of the language, the Asian face?
Yeah, right. So we haven't. We're going to talk to you about, next step is, really see how those nuances in language, such as accent and maybe dialogue at a certain point is strong enough to drive the visual attention. Yeah. Questions, Mayu?
So in trying to reconcile the difference that you find in like Janet Worker's group, would it make sense to think of it as when the stimuli are ambiguous, we behave in like slightly different ways than we might naturally behave, and so the more
You mean their study, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I agree.
So sometimes when we do lab experiments, they're very ambiguous situations, like hearing unnatural sound streams and then being expected to behave.
Yeah.
It gives us some perceptual discrimination ability threshold, but it's not really indicative of what we're likely doing in everyday situations.
That's exactly what the study is going, is to break the lab space and getting closer and closer to the real life scenarios. And indeed it's shown throughout the study, even focusing on different aspects, they really show very drastic distinctive patterns of processing, about cognitive and perceptual cognitive.
Why is that an unnatural task? I mean, it's a different task.
It doesn't.
If you hear a voice.
I hear a voice.
So you hear a voice and it's a crowd. You might look around and say, which voice?
Yeah.
Which face belongs, or which,
Right.
with that voice? Now obviously that's not moving.
Yeah.
But it's a different task.
It's a different task. Maybe ask of a different question,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
And so I think what I'm going to is say, if we can simulate as more naturalistic scenarios, what would that be?
Well, that we could talk about, let's say we give Sodium perspective, but I mean, see what you said is that the mechanisms or the processes that are involved in that are not used in the real world.
No, I'm saying there's more ambiguity there.
Sure.
A distance from, it's a real world data, right? So it is still collecting.
But I mean, the processes, like, one could say, you're missing something that they found, right? So the question is, what are the 11-month-olds doing there? And presumably they're doing something that they're not doing there.
Yeah.
And whatever they're doing, they may also engage those processes in the real world.
Yeah, I think,
too.
yeah, right.
Different task.
Just different task. I think that can connect to what Rafa mentioned is, it can explain much better with novelty because Cantonese is novel language with those babies. They're also wide English learning babies, and they show a stronger preference going to the Asian faces in this case. So probably in this case, they would just what the data review is a novelty association, novel voice with novel face, right? So I don't know. This is a discussion we need to write about, right? Yeah, Laurel.
Yeah, I just wanted to make kind of a general point and ask your opinion on it, which is, I think a lot of discussion of some of these studies has to do with novelty preferences and familiarity preferences. And we, those of us who study babies know that sometimes we get novelty preferences, sometimes we get familiarity preferences.
Yep.
And when you get each can change with age.
Um,
So you're more likely to get familiarity preferences in younger babies.
Yes.
And novelty preferences in older babies.
Yep.
So how do you, just in general, how do you deal with that? And how do you sort of conceive of that when you're comparing across ages and these race paradigms?
That's great questions.
That's a question I always have.
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. So first of all, I have to say I've been very lucky throughout the times. I only have one study showing novelty, familiarity preference, actually two. But my experience is that if we design a study for infants, can really, get them bored, they're more likely to show a novelty preference. And so, this becomes difficult with using moving faces because itself is very hard to get bored with. I mean, for babies, we'll get bored very quickly, I know. So then usually we extend the learning period. And so that's how we did. That's how we usually, one of the most salient factors is how long you want to present a study. They really get bored, and that's the best chance to review a novelty preference. Familiarity preference, from the literature, always say, it's because of some incomplete, it's underdeveloped memory of the stimuli. And so, which happened mostly in young infants, but, it's kind of, there's also, circulation in terms of, which causes what. But one thing to get away of this, because one of the dominant theory about to dictate novelty preference versus familiarity preference is about the memory capacity. Because all of the, not all, sorry, too extreme. Most of the studies, like those ones I've shown here, involves a memory component, right? So habituation is a memory, familiarization is a memory. So when a task is memory-based, then it becomes the novelty preference or familiarity preference become an issue because their memory dictates their performance. So that's how we're moving away from this. Rachel did the study about McGurk effect. We took out the memory components, and so we never need to worry about this. So I think that's also, I'm a little bit too much, always say too much about this. If we can ever actually move forward to be more diverse and more open to other paradigms with infants, and we'll be able to find a lot of things we usually couldn't find by using a memory-based task. I think with, EEG, those neuroimaging, eye tracking, those real-time recording technique can really help us make the breakthrough.
This one sort of follow-up question. So did you look at time to habituation?
Yes.
Like for fear versus?
Yeah, they're the same. They're roughly the same, yeah. There are no significant difference. For all ages, yeah.
Can you go back to your very first result, the dynamic versus static and
Yeah.
fixation?
Oh my God, that's my teenager.
No, not this one, where you had number of or percentage of fixations. And and you had correlations for dynamic, but not
This
for
one.
static. This one. So we have a result that if you add another block here for adults, so adults show a correlation between number of fixations and accuracy of memory.
Yep.
That's all with static images.
Yes.
So if I were to test dynamic images, like, do you think people are learning to deal with static images until they get to adults? or how else do you explain the
Yeah. So I think that's a very interesting prediction. So I would say because adults have much matured capacity of recognizing faces and have a lot of moving face experience, and they probably their eye movement pattern might not really affect their performance.
Yeah, so we find it for static because we only tested static.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
do find basically this correlation.
Yeah.
Different measures, but
Yeah, similar measure.
memory instead of normal face preference and
Yeah,
number of fixations versus
Yeah.
fixation shift.
yeah.
So, yeah, I'm just trying to think, is that just experience that they're getting with more static images? So when you become an adult, you show this pattern, but basically the static image.
Yeah, I believe so because as most of the study we argue is dynamic face or this experience matters most at the early stage because they don't have much exposure to static, right? How their visual system can accommodate those visual display is challenging, I have to say. And so as they gain more and more experience and their cognitive system become more and more mature, they can overcome those initial difficulties and perform very well, even though we show some still not as good as you show a moving face. But then that means one of the outcomes could be they might apply the same general approach, processing strategies to deal with regardless is moving or static, right? So we probably can find something similar. But that's something. But we have those adult eye movement data, and I do remember we didn't find any correlation between how they look at moving face or static face in terms of their memory recognition performance. Yeah.
Okay, so there's a reception up in 205, and everybody just give Gabe.
All right, thank you.